Good evening and welcome to the special city council meeting scheduled for March 5th, 2019. This meeting is now called to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Willie,
Here.
Councilmember Harris,
Here.
Councilmember Milan, Councilmember Moffett,
Here.
Councilmember Albrecht.
Here.
The purpose of this meeting is to talk about the process on interviewing our city manager, and we have Amy Sell and her associate Sonia to discuss the process. Can we turn the floor over to Amy?
Sure, thank you very much for having us here tonight. So I wanted to give everyone an update on the search so far and options for next steps. We had exactly 100 applicants. Many of those were, of those, about 24 we seriously considered through interviewing and reference checking and background checking. We have narrowed the pool down significantly. Most of that was through some negative references or things that just clearly ruled out some of the potential candidates as viable and a good fit for Clawson. So we do have a number of candidates that we would like to bring in for finalist interviews. We have scheduled March 14th, next Thursday as a date. What I've provided here is a sample interview scheduling depending on how many candidates are selected for interviews. We did have about 6 members of the community and staff that have accepted, or 7 for the panel. So we had a total of 4 additional folks step up to be involved with the interview panels. We reached out to the department directors as well as key people on some of the committees, so the chair and vice chair. And so of those, we have so far 4, although a few more might come in depending on schedules. So we had a few people that had availability in the morning. So that's why we kind of staggered the schedule based on trying to get focus on the morning if possible. But if all 7 candidates if up to 7 candidates would be selected, we've kind of put together a draft schedule where interviews would start at 8:30 in the morning. There would be an hour break for the panel. Everybody would be on one panel, so council, staff, and community members would all be on one panel. We would break for lunch, and we would break between 4:30 and 5 to allow everyone to get ready for the reception. And then we would have a community reception from 5 until 7, where finalists would be able to provide some remarks, and everyone would be able to talk individually with the finalists and provide comments that would come back to us. We would then compile the results of the interviewer forms from the interviewers and the comment cards that have been completed by attendees of the reception, and provide all that information to council to help with the decision-making process. Ways that it can go from there could be that if a larger number of candidates are brought in for interviews, council might want to narrow it down and bring a smaller number in for a second round. Or council could decide that there is a candidate that you would want to enter into interviews or into contract negotiations with right away, so that there would not need to be a second round. That's whatever, however council feels, whatever we need to do to make sure that you all are comfortable with making a selection as well. So happy to answer, it's kind of an overview, but happy to answer any questions.
So on the 14th, those interviews happen, so the earliest that council then would be meeting to make any vote would be the following Tuesday, which is the next city council meeting.
And all deliberations would be an open meeting, and a decision would be at the city board.
Conducting 7 interviews in this time frame is really tight. Is 5 o'clock, is that a settled time for the reception?
It's settled how? Well, we've been communicating it to members of we invited all of the community boards, the full people on the boards to that time, so settled in terms of we've communicated it to people, and have worked on room reservations and some of the logistics, but that's not, we could make a change if.
So if we wouldn't ship back an hour, it would just be a communications issue. So if we, is that what you're thinking, like a 6 to 8 sort of thing or something?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I was thinking, just wanted that.
We are planning on issuing a press release. We're drafting one for the appropriate people's review, that would include the bios and photos of candidates selected for interviewing, as well as an invitation and details around the reception, that we would hope to get gathered on in the next 1 to 2 days, and then circulate as quickly as possible so that we can have as much public involvement during the reception. And then public would also be available to be at the interviews as well.
Those are all open.
All of you.
So I assume that those will be held in this room is where the plan is?
We could do it in this room, I think, or council chambers. I think we had reserved all 3 rooms. Just depending on how many in case we had 30 interviewers, we would have had probably 3 panels, and there are a variety of ways we could have done it, but given where we are on numbers of interviews, I think 1 panel makes the most sense.
So we're talking a total of 8 people at this point in time?
I think maybe 9.
9, yep. Council.
Are you preparing some sort of like form or rating for them to provide feedback? Okay.
Yes, as well as sample interview questions for each of the different categories that we are looking as criteria. We will also be providing general interview instructions to the interview panel members so that they know, for instance, which are inappropriate or illegal questions to ask in general. So we'll be providing that level of guidance, as well as a form to fill out for each of the different areas that council is focusing on for this search.
And a similar type of handout during the reception? Or
The reception is a little more straightforward, where we would have options for each candidate where they could indicate if they, a variety of different comfort levels, like I would strongly recommend, do not recommend, not sure, for each candidate, as well as be able to provide candidates. So it'd be much more free form. Where in the structured interviews, we would want feedback on each of the different areas, with, again, the same type of multiple options to select, as well as an overall, would you recommend this candidate to become the city manager, yes or no?
May I ask a question? This is just a rhetorical one. If any member of the council is asked, were there more applicants than you're interviewing? The answer would be yes. And the next question, how many were there? I might say, well, around 100. Well, why did you not have more than that? What's the response I should give publicly?
Oh yeah, and we often would include this in the press release as well. The reason is because of the vetting process that we do before presenting candidates to council, identifies who would be the best fit.
I think there might have to be some detail on that, just so the public has a real understanding that your involvement was very thorough in that regard and very incisive and detailed, and you had legitimate reasons on why people were not included. So they have the credibility to respond intelligently to that question, because they will rise.
Sure. Yeah, we did, that's, in part, we could release the rubric that we use to evaluate candidates. Perhaps that could provide some additional comfort into the process and thoroughness of our review.
And I know that people had to go through a background check, so I'm assuming that any sort of criminal thing that came back would have been an excluded item, just so that as a council, as a community, we aren't having to explain that baggage if it ever came to light.
Yeah, so that was a factor in excluding the number of applicants.
Right.
Just even cursory cyber reviews of employment showed quite a few things that we just were not comfortable with.
Really?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's extremely interesting. That's telling in and of itself.
You gotta be careful, the internet doesn't forget.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right.
other questions regarding the process?
Well, so I guess my question is what's next for us as a council, right? And I think there might be some confusion about that, so I don't know if we can come to a conclusion on that here.
I'm proposing that during the city council meeting that we possibly look at making a motion to amend the agenda to discuss what we would just like to discuss these candidates this evening during the open session of our regularly scheduled city council meeting and find out where council stands on the current applicants and find out where we're at with that.
Let me throw a question back at you.
Okay.
I'm an interested member of the community, and I looked at your agenda, and all of a sudden you're making an amendment on something that's significant, and I can't come. I mean, is there going to be a negative reaction to that? I just don't know. I'm just asking that question.
Well, one of, those discussions are happening before public discussion. There's certainly vehicles that people can communicate to us before the process of next week where there's open interviews and people can participate in that process. Or possibly that's something that we schedule a future meeting. The time is of the essence, so
Okay.
we need to notify the public so that, again, decisions and discussion at the city council meeting so that the public can be a part of that.
I mean, I wouldn't mind announcing, and I don't know, based on the confidentiality that was requested by the candidates, exactly what kind of conversation we might be able to have. I wouldn't mind having another meeting, maybe even Thursday, to talk through this, that we could give the public more notice. Again, I'm not sure exactly to what end. The public won't be, I don't think, seeing any of these applicants' information before then. So, I don't know what kind of input they might be able to give that they haven't already been able to give. So I guess I'm talking myself out of it.
It's all right. That's
Good talk.
That's what we're here for, to like get it out,
No, that's very
debate it.
intelligent.
When I deliberate, I didn't normally do it with myself. But,
As long as you don't answer the question.
Well, let me answer this question, thank you for the affidavit on the confidentiality. Does that mean now that the number of people recommended that you're going to get from them in advance, a waiver of that at least, so their names can come out? Is it necessary, or?
It would be, we would be getting, they would know that we would give them the courtesy to know that we would be releasing their names.
Good.
And it's clear that once a candidate becomes a finalist and is going to be interviewed,
All right,
it's public.
I just want to be sure that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do notify them, like we have somebody on standby to make phone calls and to gather the bios and photos today. Everybody knows that the meeting is tonight, the interviews that they're selected is the 14th. And then once, again, we don't them to want to be surprised, we want to give them notice that it's coming, but we are planning a full press release with everyone that's selected to make it public. It's going to be very, very public. If someone is not selected, then there's no use in getting their name out there
Right.
if there's nothing forward.
Well, is the council all satisfied with the process as it's been outlined and proceeded? I mean,
How much time do you spend going through each one of these candidates?
It depends on how rigorous, for the candidates that have made it to this point, between the interviews and the background checks and the reference checking, cyber review, compiling, maybe 5 or 6 hours per candidate. So then for the other candidates, there could be a very cursory look at their resume where it's clear that they're not going to meet the bar that we've set, or there's a deficit in certain areas. So each candidate, it depends. Sometimes they look really good, but then we have the interview, or then we get the reference checking. And we've had a few that fell out in the reference checking. too. So we had already done a fair amount of work to get to that point, but then we just heard questionable things about during the reference checking, that somebody looked really good, but we couldn't get over that. We're not comfortable presenting anyone that we do not feel comfortable is going to be a good fit.
You know, sometimes the public is cynical, and I think they don't have a thorough awareness of how in-depth your process is. And it might be wise just to let the council know, and you did already, some hours spent per applicant as you narrow them down, but the extent of hours prior to that, going through 100 applicants, so they get a sense that you're thorough. You're not just blandishing, you go into a lot of detail, you go into a lot of background information and sort of give them an idea of the background information you go into. So there's a thoroughness, just so the public knows that this process, because right now, this body is sort of under attack on credibility. And I think it's important to restore their credibility that this process has been very, very thorough, well vetted, complete, and for the benefit of their interviews and the community interviews. The people who are coming forward are people really who have talent. It's not just a guessing game. So I think that the essence of that can be detailed to them and brought out, and they have the explanation when they're questioned.
Any other questions?
I just, in thinking through this, sorry, to present another scenario, and just let me talk this out. You know, is it possible to release names of these finalists, and then in another meeting on Thursday, review them? And again, I know that, yeah, I see both sides of that, right? Release the names of, these are our finalists, right? And I don't know.
They're recommended, I would call them applicants at this point.
Okay.
If we
Okay.
decide to, if we, at the conclusion of this meeting, decide to move forward with them, then they would become finalists, and we would be sharing their names publicly.
And we're not making any decisions in this meeting, correct?
What are you
Other than the process, how it's going to proceed.
What are you trying to flesh out by releasing their names? Like, what do you think, what's the outcome? you're looking for?
Well, it gives the public an opportunity to see and give input. I don't know.
Because that's, if we can keep all 7, their opportunity is next Thursday, and their names are out there. If at the city council meeting, we decide on 5, then only those 5 are done as a press release, and the community, again, is available to research between now and next Thursday. For me, I think 7 may or may not be too many. And as I say, I don't want to make a decision, but from a council standpoint, we may or may not decide to whittle those down. And I don't know that having that discussion at city council this evening really changes where the public's input can happen between here and Thursday, or because the names wouldn't be released this evening, they'd be released on Thursday if we were going to schedule another meeting. So that wouldn't change anything.
Practically speaking, I don't know how we have discussions about candidates without revealing certain details about them, or I know on the one hand, we're trying to do this the right way. I know your organization had requested a closed session of some sort.
I oppose it.
It was determined that we should have this meeting instead of that closed session. I'm a little concerned about having public discussion about candidates without being clear or transparent about what we're talking about. Just concerned, right? Jumpy, forgive me.
So is your concern talking about the details of candidates whose resumes have not been made public? Is that what you're concerned about?
Yeah.
One thing we did in a similar meeting later is we just assigned to the candidates numbers. And when we talked about the applicants, well, I feel that candidate number one may not fit here for whatever. And if there was a consensus that candidate one, then they whittled it down in the public meeting simply by that, and then the names were released of those that.
Is there a problem with that from a
No,
legal
I
standpoint?
suggested it only.
Bypassing the OMA by failing certain information from public consumption?
I reached out as well regarding a legal opinion on that, and it was okay because the reason for using numbers was to respect the confidentiality request, and therefore it was allowed, as long as the decision and debate happened publicly.
And honoring confidentiality requests, when you're applying for a public position, right? This is a dangerous ground, I think, but I don't know that we're obligated to honor their request for confidentiality. And I know that's, and according to the OMA, the closed session is permissible to review candidates for this office if they request that. It's permissible, but it's not required, right? And I don't know if it's bad business then to release these candidates' information if they might not be considered for an interview. I don't know.
I think it's bad practice personally. I mean, if you were, if you were interviewing and you weren't selected as a finalist, I mean, it could have negative ramifications on your employment with your employer or your career, or your credibility, or for a plethora of things. So I think just as a good business practice, I fully agree with us not releasing information until we have finalists.
I do see your point, but even if they are finalists, I mean, it's a very fine line between being a finalist and getting to this point of being presented to City Council. And that same impact, I mean, frankly, only one of these people, or maybe none of them, but only one person will be our next city manager, right? So, and this is not a business situation. This is a government situation. And so I'm arguing for transparency, but I'm trying to be respectful at the same time. I don't know who our obligation is to more. Is it to transparency to our residents, or is it to these applicants? I don't know.
Michigan, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say, so because there was the initial request by Amy's organization that the intent was that in closed session that we were going to whittle this candidate list down, her intent was not at that time to bring in all of the candidates for an interview. So that was their plan in the process on having less than the individuals that they presented to us, and were looking for us to make a decision on some of those. Now, it's possible that we just defer to them and say, you present 5 instead of 7, or whatever that is, whatever. So I'm saying, so that's.
I know the way that we, Mr. Haberman's interview lasted how long? 90 minutes?
Well,
And
yeah.
I know how
Yeah.
thorough
Yeah.
this body can be, and so I'm very concerned about trying to fit 7 interviews into this time frame that we have scheduled for next Thursday.
And I can tell you from my experience in HR, when you spend an entire day interviewing a bunch of people, it gets really hard to separate them unless you're, I mean, they just, everyone blends together. And so it would be a disservice to the candidates and the community to try and interview that many
Yes.
people in one day.
One of the things, I've interviewed in about half a dozen states. Michigan's the only state I've run into this. Most interviews that are held in closed session. The interviews themselves, all that information is held in closed session until they come up with finalists. Michigan, because of its OMA and various other things, really creates a stilted atmosphere. And I know in Adrian, one of the options they did was they wanted that list reduced down to no more than 10. And so the firm did precisely that. And then when they did the interviews or went through the material, they asked them to reduce it down to 5. Then they did the interview, and then they used the number system to get it down to 2, and then brought back the 2 for another interview. They went through a 2-interview process, but still, the number system seemed to be about the best way to be able to have that discussion without revealing the individual's name. And it was amazing how quickly the council had already decided, and those 2 came to the surface very, very quickly. And the confidentiality was still respected.
And that's a valid point in that we were given a ton of interviews or information about these candidates to review. And I mean, I applaud the thoroughness, the video interview and the, every single social media link and all that kind of stuff, which, I mean, we were given a lot of resources to really come in here today with, it was almost like our own little personal first interview kind of thing with the amount of information we were given, so.
What if each of the council members gave us like a list of their order, and then we compile that and make a recommendation about?
That might be a good idea.
Is that allowed?
It's just ranking.
I'm jumpy,
Well, why are you? This is an elimination process. It's not the selection process, which is going to be entirely different and open. So this is narrowing it down so you have the ability to do this efficiently and timely because you're under a guideline. So having your consultant do that, who's already done it, then I think that is going to help you. And you're not running into any problem by that process. You're making it easier for yourself so that when you do interview, you're more efficient because the list is narrower and you're focusing on the details that were provided to you in that documentation.
So
That's a good idea.
however we produce this list and supply it, it's part of public record. That communication is part of public record.
I'm not at all ready to bounce onto that, no. Because you're in the process of trying to determine who's more appropriate for it in the elimination process. And where it really comes into play is when you go through the public process. The selection to get there is not open. No.
Isn't that a personnel issue?
It certainly is, and it is part of the process. There's got to be some because they're not even, when you look at it and you're giving the contract administrator the authority to eliminate, they're making the conscious decision. That's a private entity making the decision. That's not you. So there's no violation of that. That's what you hired them for. And they've done it already. So they're just eliminating their final list to you to make it more efficient.
Am I the only one who feels you received 100 resumes? You said a bunch of them you could cross off for various reasons, but then we get 7 out of 100. I feel like you've already had a greater vetting process than we have with this, and that perhaps I'm in the process of hiring several people right now. I've been going through hundreds of resumes, and it's daunting, and I get it. But in talking to people and throughout the process, you learn things, and some things on paper and some things in a conversation, you weigh them differently. And I guess my concern is I want the ability to make those weights on my own with the individuals as opposed to going by all the data that you gave us, because data is stagnant and there are just other things that can bring life to something. So I'm not for giving up any more power on this.
But then, again, you have to look at how long do you extend the process from that? Because you're also under a time limit. I'm not saying you sacrifice the time limit, but do you feel as though you undercut the thoroughness of what you're doing just by eliminating automatically and bringing down fewer? You're just gonna have the same opportunity to look at those who are recommended and do the same vetting you would if there were 5 more.
Well, and I guess my question would be, so is that, do you want to go to Amy's office and look at all 100 and then you come back with maybe a different list?
Sure, I'll do that.
Well, no, I'm just trying
Yeah,
to,
sign me up. Whatever, yeah, I'll do that. That's not what I'm saying, but, no, that's not what I'm saying. But yeah, I would do that. It would be kind of interesting, actually. So
Well, I mean, I guess what is your thought on how this should, I mean,
we set a timeline, we set a deadline to have this accomplished. Sometimes you have to move your deadline. You're like, I'm not for sacrificing a process in order to meet a deadline. I'm not for that. On something like this that is movable, no. So if we're just trying to get to March 14th or whatever the date was, by just cutting corners and stuff, I'm not for that. So I don't have the right answer because it seems like there isn't a right answer because our hands and feet are tied with everything these days in a ridiculous way. So I guess tell us what we can do and then we'll make a decision from there.
Well, your contract goes to when?
Oh, I advise the council, I've got a vacation planned. If they want me to come back in May or April, late April, I'll be happy to be open-ended. It's up to them.
but we've also got pushback from the community that they'd like us to get this.
Well, I think there's a few different pathways. I mean, one is I get additional individual input and then possibly, and another, so there's maybe one kind of like addendum onto that. I get input from everybody and it's very clear that there's a last place. Maybe we could make some changes, or if it's clear that everybody has lots of is in different places on the candidates, then we definitely would bring 7 back in. Or we just go ahead and bring all 7 in, because that was an excellent point, that once you get to, everybody that is on this list, we felt could be a good fit, given that there would be a few different steps in the process. So one option is we bring everybody in. That way, since we can't have a fully open discussion around the candidates, you will all get additional information. You will get lots of input from the public that will be attending, as well as you will have the interviews themselves. And then at that next meeting on Tuesday, you might be in a place where you're comfortable with one candidate, or you might be comfortable with maybe bringing 2 or 3 back in. Adding more candidates on, adding another round of interviews is a very easy way to get to the comfort level so that all of you are very confident that you're doing what's best for Clawson. And we can still bring it. So bringing 7 people in, as we laid out, is logistically possible.
I don't think it's practical. I just can't, I don't think interviewing 7 people in one day is at all practical. I mean, the only way that I think that if we were gonna do 7 people, then we would have to break it up into more than one day. That's just, everyone's gonna meld together. I've been there. Everyone's gonna meld together, and we're not gonna be any better posture to make a great decision for Clawson by adding quantity over quality. I would rather go through deliberations. We've gotten a ton of information. We got the video interviews. You get a sense for who they are and personality. We've got all their links to check out. We've got their background. We've got their cover letters for the ones that included them. We've got a ton of information. We should be able to at least whittle that down to a manageable group to interview in person. Plus, I mean, you know, second interviews, you got people who live out of state, we're gonna have to bear the cost of bringing them in, and then if we're gonna do a second round, that's more costs. I mean, we've gotten a lot of information. We just need to use it and make some decisions, I think.
Well, then the point of doing what they did in Adrian could be a good option, where candidates are numbered and there's discussion based on numbers.
I'm all for that.
Would you be better off with 5 people instead of 6?
Gosh, I thought we were going to 3, but I mean, I think 5 is, I think, you know,
5 makes for a very long night.
you know, 4, maybe 4, would you live with 4? I could live with 4.
Well, maybe the concern is also what you're saying, so, then they're gonna have the community trying to distinguish between 7.
In 2 hours, I mean, yeah, and everyone's gonna wanna talk to them individually. You can't talk to, even if we have 20 people, you know, they can't.
If I may, what you end up with a larger number is you end up with a much more structured interview. There has to be a great number of questions that everyone on the council is aware of, and those questions are asked of each candidate, the same questions each time, so you can keep it down to a 45-minute interview.
And the problem with that is you can't pivot based on answers, right?
No.
You have to, right, you don't get to explore
Exactly.
and grill like we grilled you.
No. But no, your point is
Right.
well taken, because what ends up happening is you're only doing a screening interview, and then you're gonna reduce it from there to a more manageable number. Then you'll be able to have a much more open-ended, a little bit more free-flowing in
And that's
terms of
what-
the interview and the interaction.
And that's what we paid them for, to do the screening. So the screening's been done. Now it's time for us to, you know, based on the information, you know, let our opinion come through based on the information we have, who's gonna best serve Clawson. And we have, again, I mean, I spent 2 hours going over these, you know, over the weekend, and there's a ton of information. We've got a lot of information to make these decisions. It's not like we were just handed resumes. We were handing, you know, 15-minute videos and links to everything to search them on in every Google search you did with a link that we could find anything that they ever said. I mean, we got a lot of information.
Based on Paul is the number, so your 100, then just go your initial, real quick, not going to work. About how many did
There
you
were
go from 100?
24 that we seriously considered.
So 24, and then, so that, would that mean that the other, you know, how much the math is, were those all excluded based on, or?
There was a concern about their experience in terms of depth, or there was an issue and a problem based on that we were able to identify. Either through a reference check or publicly available information
Those are the ones above the 24?
within the 24.
Within
So
the
those
24.
17,
Okay.
the 24 that made this, the first cut, there were 17 that we excluded for a variety of reasons, either publicly available information that was compromising, reference checks that raised issues that we didn't feel comfortable that they were the right, for instance, leadership style.
Okay.
Or their level of qualifications, when we really took a look at it, reviewed their interview questions to the rubric that we had, we didn't feel that they had a strong enough capability in those different areas.
What would
And
be
the
the
7
exact-
that you did select are all clean, they didn't have any of those
And
characteristics.
they've also, and those have also had the background check that we've done in additional.
Well, how many would you say were excluded because of qualifications compared to the other? Like, is there, you know, just trying to get like a sense, like from Paula's standpoint, if you had the 24 that were left, and then you pull the compromising people right off the top, off of that, who's left in your not enough depth list?
Maybe it's half and half in terms of negatives versus not enough positives-ish. I mean, I remember there were 2 candidates that we talked about
Right.
that I was leaning towards, but just felt that their experiences weren't deep enough. So, I know of the two remaining, you know, yeah, it's probably about 50-50 between finding something negative and just not feeling comfortable that the quality and quantity of their experiences was gonna be sufficient for the needs of Clawson. There were a couple, there were a couple that I really liked and wanted to see that, but it just, I didn't feel that they could really do a good job. Or I wasn't comfortable enough that it would be a good job because it might have been a stretch based on what the prior.
Would that have been after talking with them or just from a paperwork standpoint?
Most of the 24 we interviewed, unless we found something out very quickly that was unsavory.
Does that help at all?
Because I think I understand what you're, I mean, because this was our goal, was to give you 7 people that we all felt good about. Again, maybe they won't be perfect, but that's why we do a few more steps in the interview process and to see them. At this point, do you have some strong opinions about who you would like to go forward with and not go forward with?
No, but given the scenario you just posed to us, I'm curious as to at least one of them is on our list at all, given death and all of those things. So I guess I'm just curious, how close is a determination, right? Like, what's the teetering mark to put someone in or out? If someone has something salacious on Facebook or out there in media, I get it, that would be an automatic, right? But 24 people, they can't all have that, and I guess, not knowing what the teetering marks are, and looking at the questions of the rubric, like, it's like warm and fuzzy things, not like absolute things. Like, I'm just uncomfortable with part of it. And we're past all of that, so it doesn't even matter at this point. I just want to figure out how we're going to get this done, because I would just like to get it done.
There were probably 2 candidates that we did provide that were more up-and-comers in terms of lower on experience level, but we felt that what they did offer some good ideas and education background that could be a fit. So within what we had been doing, we did have a few that were kind of, there was a gradient. There's, as you know, there's a variety of experiences and qualifications here that we felt would transfer of the candidates that you've seen. There are 2 that are probably a little bit lighter, but still have a lot of potential. There are a few others that have very good transferable skills, but maybe not as direct. And there's some that have the most highest level of relevant experiences. So even within that 7, we have slightly different views, but we did feel like they all were strong enough to be able to get to know them better and to see who might be the biggest fit and who might click the most with council. So, and whether you felt that something that you were able to see and do didn't hit that bar for you, or if you wanted to bring, have more time to get to know them. I guess we wanted you to have that option as opposed to us eliminating somebody that we still felt could be a really good fit and had some really positive attributes. So, it was a tough decision on a few of them where to draw the line.
I mean, we hired you to do a job, and just in my interactions with your organization and seeing what you provided, I'm comfortable with where we're at on these candidates. I'll say again that I'm uncomfortable, not with anything you've done, but I am uncomfortable with using code names to discuss candidates publicly. Just something doesn't feel right about it to me, but it's just my gut, and we'll do what we decide.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't have anything to add. I look at this as you either have another meeting on Thursday and then discuss the names at that time.
Is that,
What's the
one
difference if we
alternative.
discuss the names on
That's
Thursday
not
or
the
if we
most
discuss them
desirable.
today?
Or you use the number system.
Right.
I mean, if we tell the candidates that, look, Thursday, we're going to be discussing publicly their names, and if that's not something that they're comfortable with, if they want to withdraw their name, then that's up to them.
That's right.
That's their own choice.
I mean, again, I'm
At least,
not an
at
advocate.
least you
run
give
there.
them, at least you give them the opportunity to make that choice.
I mean, again, the risk you run there is you eliminate a good candidate
Yeah,
who might
right.
otherwise have been,
Right, well.
yeah.
It doesn't want to jeopardize their position.
You mentioned that, so they're expecting answers this evening. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. And so one of the answers could be, you haven't been eliminated. And there's gonna be a public discussion around your candidacy on Thursday. And if you want to withdraw prior to that, we're providing you that option.
So they already know that we're gonna discuss the names tonight.
None of the candidates know who has been moved forward to this
Right.
level. They know that we've been upfront with everybody about the timeline, so that they would kind of pencil in the 14th, so that they could be here if needed, but they do not know who you've recommended. Our plan is, they do know there is a meeting tonight, that we were expecting to be able to communicate to them by tomorrow what their status is either way.
Didn't you talk to Carlito also about the number system?
Yes, he felt that the number system was fine because of the fact that we're respecting confidentiality, that he's confident that that is not a breach of any Open Meetings Act violation. And that we'd be free to do that. And that's what they've used in other communities facing the same challenge.
So it's not an uncommon usage, you know, you may feel unfamiliar with it. But it does help you narrow down, if you want to narrow it down, so you can have a meaningful discussion on the 14th or before the 14th, to even narrow it more.
Well, I guess we have
Yes.
about 10 minutes to think about
Yes,
it,
you
and
do.
then we can vote on that as an option
Yeah.
in council
Okay?
So we would
meetings.
be voting on whether or not to meet on Thursday, or would we be able to apply the numbers today and talk about them today?
Those would be the two things
Things we
to
discussed,
vote
whether or
on.
not- Okay.
There's nothing else?
And just one other little point of delaying a decision until Thursday is that in terms of logistics about getting flights out and
Cost of flights.
the cost of flights and the concern about withdrawing candidates withdrawing, so, those would be.
You would encourage a discussion on the candidates this evening and a decision regarding those finalists this evening instead of waiting until Thursday.
I think I've picked up on a few different concerns that people have. And if we want to avoid using numbers to discuss people, when we want to avoid kind of a large number of candidates that are coming in, and we want to ensure that there's enough ability of council to have input throughout the process, and again, for me not to have even more, but really be a facilitator at this point. My suggestion might be to bring also even, unfortunately, making a tough choice. I would probably lean towards bringing everybody in on Thursday in terms of having the fewest people withdraw because of concern over the process and having to not wait until 2 more days. It would give me more time to get to know everybody. It would be fully open at that point. And that way, it might, because it can be very difficult to come, I mean, I think these candidates that we provided to you have a variety of different strengths and areas you want to explore further. I think that there might be differences of opinion on who to bring in also, which might be hard to reconcile pretty quickly, especially if you're in a very constrained ability to talk about people. So it might be honestly just, even though if we bring everybody in next Thursday, again, it's logistically challenging and you might have to add another interview, but it might be the best way to make sure we can keep these candidates engaged and give you all enough time to thoroughly review them.
And the process on that will be that each applicant is in the room separate without the other applicants being out elsewhere.
Yeah.
So sometimes the interviews in that format go very quickly because you get a very quick sense, well, this is not the person we want.
You know, and especially since you do have all that other additional information,
Right.
you're probably going to come in well prepared, I think, to know which candidates you might have almost ruled out, which ones you're more excited about, that you want some more information. And then after the interviews happen, we'll have all the evaluation sheets from everybody compiled, and we will have all the input from the community to provide to you. So if you thought you had a lot to read before, you'll have an even greater body of knowledge to bring into the deliberations.
We'll have no more information than we have today, right?
Oh, well, after the interviews.
I know, but we'll have no more information than we have today to prepare for the interviews. I mean, we're in the same spot next Thursday as we are today if we don't make any decisions. And I think it sends a bad message that we can't make a decision like this.
Well, and when you bring up, flights, so we may be incurring a lot of plane costs for individuals that some on this council may not feel are candidates that would actually, so to incur a flight cost if that's a candidate that isn't of serious consideration, just food for thought. Oh, we have to, have somebody move to adjourn?
Okay.
Move that we adjourn.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Ayers,
Yes.
Councilmember Milan,
Yes.
Councilmember Moffett,
Yes.
Councilmember Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Wood.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're being